Hello, this is Dietrich Epps with the Results Leadership Group. We're welcoming you to our first webinar in the series, Achieving Measurable Collective Impact with Results-Based Accountability. Throughout this webinar series, we'll be talking about using collective impact to build results-based organizations and community partnerships. I'd like to take a moment to introduce my colleague, and she's going to share a little bit about her role in helping to support, as a team member from RLG, the implementation of these webinars. Eileen?
Thank you, Dietrich. Hi, my name is Eileen Finn, and I work at the Results Leadership Group. I'm the Director of Operations, and I'll be assisting Dietrich on launching polls and taking care of the question box and that type of thing throughout the webinar.
And we're going to get started right away, and we'd like to start with a very interactive part of our webinar. We are moving forward on time, but understanding that some individuals are still joining. We have folks from international venues as far as New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the United States, several states across the country. So we're very excited to give you time to join. And the first thing we'd like to do is to ask you to share a little bit about who you are and your basic knowledge about results-based accountability and collective impact. So as folks join, we're just going to invite you straight into a poll to share information about yourself. Are you new to results-based accountability? Basically, this is your first or one of the few times you've been introduced to RBA. Are you new to collective impact? You're one of our RBA family, but this is the first time you're hearing about or learning about collective impact. Perhaps you have practiced results-based accountability in the community that you work in, and you just are not familiar with results-based accountability, or perhaps you have applied RBA and collective impact within your work, and you are here perhaps as a consultant or a practitioner in community. We're very interested in knowing more about you as we move forward in this series. So we're going to give some time for you to share that information now. Okay, I will reintroduce myself. This is Dietrich Epps. I'm with the Results Leadership Group, and I'm happy to welcome you to this beginning of a webinar series and to kind of share with you a little bit about who we have on the webinar today. I do want to let you know that you will be muted during this webinar because we have around 200 individuals registered for the webinar, and of course, although we want to hear back from you, hearing your voice will not be possible, but we would like to hear back from you through the polls and through the chat line that is on the right-hand side of your screen. So throughout the webinar, we'll be inviting you to share information through the poll and through the chat line. So look to the right of your screen and you can be prepared to do that. Just so that you know a little bit about who's on the call now, there are 35% of you who are new to results-based accountability. So I'm very excited about that. I think you'll be able to find out about our framework and understand how you can apply it. About 19% are new to collective impact. So that gives you a little bit of information about the audience that you are a part of. About 22% have practiced RBA in communities or in organizations. 6% are part of a collective impact initiative, and about 19% have applied RBA to a collective impact initiative. So I think this is a great indication of who we're gathering together with today. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to our conversation together on today. For today's objective, each of you will be invited to deepen your understanding of results-based accountability and how it's applied to collective impact. I understand through the poll that some of you already have some experience with RBA and collective impact. So what I invite you to do is to listen in terms of how I am applying it to sharing this information with those who are new. For those of you who are also on the webinar and have looked at collective impact, the second objective is around understanding how RBA can be applied to the common agenda. There are 5 conditions in collective impact. Today we will focus on the common agenda, but over the course of the next few weeks we'll be looking at each of the conditions of collective impact. The last objective for today is to understand how you can join a community of practice that is gathering together to look at how do you achieve measurable collective impact with results-based accountability. I'll talk more about that as we go through the webinar, but this is just the basic objectives that we'll be completing on today's webinar. I also want to share with you that on today, I'll be sharing a lot about my own personal experiences working in community. I have been working with RBA, results-based accountability, for about a decade, over a decade now, and using it within community. And my experiences are diverse along with this work. I will be sharing my experiences as a community leader that work towards measurable community change, specifically around the Baltimore and the Maryland area. I'll be sharing with you my experiences as a results-based facilitator of community partnerships in various sectors and how I've used the application of RBA in support of community partnerships. I'll also be talking to you about my experiences as an executive coach. I work with community and organization leaders to support their work in partnerships and within their own organizations, so I'll be talking to you about that. I'm also have education and expertise as a human services administration consultant, and a particular focus of mine is on building a results-based organization, especially in health, human services, and education. I also have experience as a program evaluator. So you'll see that my experiences are diverse, and I'll be looking at results-based accountability and collective impact through each of these lenses and sharing my own experiences with you. I recognize as well that you have experiences, and will be inviting you to share your experiences along in communities, whether it be in the area of any of the ones that I mentioned personally, but perhaps you have experience with creating a common agenda, which is what we'll be talking about today, and you also may have experiences in the other conditions of collective impact. I'm noting them here so that you can understand what those 5 conditions of collective impact are, but recognize that we won't be going over each of them today. And let me just allow the slide the opportunity to catch up. One of the things that I want to note about the experiences that we'll have over the next several weeks on the webinar is this, that as you look at the experiences that I'll be sharing, we will, as I stated, give you the opportunity to share back as well. And this is part of what we're looking at, gathering information towards building a community of practice for working together. As we look at today's condition of a common agenda, we'll focus on a first story of where I began to learn about results-based accountability, and that was in the state of Maryland. And I'll share this with you. This is a document that was developed with the Anna E. Casey Foundation in 2001. And some of you are familiar with the Anna E. Casey Foundation who are on this call. As a matter of fact, I think we may have some representatives from the Anna E. Casey Foundation. Welcome today. I applaud the work of the Anna E. Casey Foundation. They are long-time champions of results-based accountability, and actually I was introduced as a community member in Baltimore who was actually involved in early childhood education and change in Baltimore. And as the director of a child care center in West Baltimore, an impoverished area in West Baltimore, and as the president of Baltimore City's Child Care Association, I attended some legislative events in Maryland. And this summary is an excerpt from Maryland's 2001 Kids Count fact books that was published by the Anna E. Casey Foundation. And it summarizes in here that the legislators came together in a way that was very atypical, looking at school readiness and how young children could improve their readiness. They realized that as legislators, even though they came together across the aisle in a bipartisan way, they were looking at a system for early childhood that actually was not measuring or reporting whether children were entering school ready to learn. And Delegate Mark Shriver at that time called them, he said that we ourselves are unaccountable. So they decided to bring together a joint hearing that was unprecedented at the time, where all of the legislators came together to look at school readiness and children entering school ready to learn. As a community member who was passionate about change in early childhood, I attended these legislative hearings and events and began to learn about how partners could engage with legislators, community members, and other stakeholders in driving change for early childhood. We learned over time at a state and local level that in 2002, only 49% of children were entering kindergarten fully ready to learn in Maryland, and that was not acceptable. At a local level in Baltimore, I was asked to join a group of leaders in something called the Leadership in Action Program, 40 leaders who came together to look at the data local for Baltimore and to determine what could be done to drive change so that at the community level and at the state level, children were doing better. We were invited to look at one measure across all community partners, and that was what you're looking at here. For Maryland, it was 49%, but in Baltimore, only 27% of children were entering kindergarten ready to succeed. We met over time in our various counties, and by focusing in on one result and a single indicator for measuring the success of that result, we were able to drive change in a collective way where by 2012, 82% of children entering kindergarten were assessed as fully ready to learn. These results are dramatic and they are significant. Working with results-based accountability, I understood that Maryland children could do better between the ages of 0 to 5, so that each year that when that cohort of kindergartners arrived, they were doing better or at least equally as well as the cohort before them. This is a little bit of information about Maryland. Maryland children are similar probably to the children that are in your venue. We had some children that were attending full-day kindergarten programs. Some children were attending half-day kindergarten programs. This is data that is from Ready by 5, a Maryland agency, an organization that supports the distribution and sharing of information about school readiness for Maryland's children. In each county, we began to think about how many children were there 0 to 4, how many children were there that were 5 years old, and what did those children look like when they were coming through the door. So each child was assessed by their kindergarten teacher, so it wasn't a written down pen and paper assessment. It was an observational assessment where each child was assessed in various domains of learning, and then a portfolio was developed to determine if they were fully ready to learn, or if they were approaching readiness, they had some of the skills necessary, or if they were developing readiness, which meant that they did not have the skills necessary to succeed in kindergarten. You'll notice by this slide that there were children, we found out in Maryland, children with disabilities. There were English language learners, children on free and reduced meals that would have been from low-income families. We thought about how might we target interventions specifically to these groups of children. We also began to look at the data and disaggregate it by ethnicity for the state of Maryland. And this was very helpful to determine the communities and the people that were more vulnerable to not entering kindergarten ready to succeed. And I'll share with you a little bit in 2002 to 2012 to 2013, you can see by this graph that the orangish line went from 49% to 82% of children being fully ready to learn. And then if you'll see the approaching line, which is the bluish line, went from 44% of children to 15% of children who were approaching readiness. So some of those children each year that would have come in as approaching readiness, more and more children were coming in as fully ready. And then the line that I'm most excited about and over time have shared is that last line, which is green, which says developing readiness. These are the children who would have normally come in with challenges or even needed some additional interventions. And this is the harder to reach group. So you can see that by over the decade, less children were coming in at developing readiness. This goes to show that by targeting interventions to specific populations of people that we understood more about because of the data is really an effective way of making change and driving results. Maryland has been using results-based accountability through its Governor's Office for Children and through other organizations for many years now, and the results are striking. They continue to be very positive results. After this time, Maryland continues to create a plan called Getting Ready, and each year publishes the readiness of its children. As we move forward in this webinar series, I will actually talk more about Maryland and its school readiness efforts and some of the strengths and challenges that exist in sustaining this type of change over time. The purpose of today's webinar, again, is on a common agenda. And so let's talk about how did Maryland do it? How did we develop a common agenda using results-based accountability? Well, let me take a moment and talk about results-based accountability. This is the turn the curve thinking that is the core of RBA. It helps communities and organizations to move from talk to action very rapidly. As a matter of fact, you can walk through this turn the curve process in about an hour after this webinar, based upon what you learned today. If you are new to RBA, we can support you in learning how to do that effectively. The turn the curve thinking starts with a result. What result are you looking to achieve in the community? For Maryland, it was children enter school ready to learn. How are we doing is the baseline or the data that shows the achievement of that result. The next step in turn the curve thinking is why does the data look the way that it does? What is the history of that data? And what is the story behind that data? The next question is, who can help to address the factors that you find out when you learn the story? Then the next step is, what are some options that we have for what would work to improve the data by addressing what we learned in the story? So all of these steps go hand in hand. You learn about something in the story. Who are some partners that can help to address what you've learned? What are some great ideas that would work as you address it? And then what do we actually propose to do based upon what works? So this is the turn the curve thinking that we'll look at today as a part of the common agenda. Again, there are two core areas that we'll be looking at. One of them is results-based accountability. There are two key principles to the turn the curve and results-based accountability. The first one is we start with the end and we work backwards towards the mean. So what does that exactly mean? Any work that you're going to do, you want to think about what is the end result that you want of that work. So some of you may create a vision board. I love doing vision boards. Do any of you do vision boards? I love them. So what I love about a vision board is that I put right before me, what do I want to get out of the next, let's say, year of my life? And I picture it and I put it up and I have it before me as a vision. Well, results-based accountability invites partners to do the same thing in community. What is the end result that you want for your community? And then you work backwards from how you will get to that result. What are the means by which you will achieve that result? So this is the first principle of results-based accountability. The second principle is data-driven, transparent decision-making. We use data to drive the decisions, and we make sure that the reason that strategies are selected is clear and transparent, even in challenging situations. So how do we distinguish the ends? Today, we're going to focus on, with the common agenda, the end being the well-being of a whole population. So the end result would be, how do you know that that community is better off? As we move forward throughout the webinar series, we'll talk about strategies once they're implemented as programs on the ground. How will you know that they're being implemented well with mutually reinforcing activities amongst your partners? But today's conversation is really about population accountability and how can you look at the condition of well-being for children, adults, families, or communities and be very clear about that end result. And this is the first part of a common agenda when you're using RBA as a common agenda. An example is all North Carolinians are healthy. It's very clear. The people of North Carolina can look at that and say, that's something that we want, and all partners can gather around it. But then how would you measure if you are achieving that result? In RBA, we call that an indicator. Indicators measure the achievement of a result at a population level. And as we move forward, I will talk more in our webinar series about continuous communication and how important it is to have a language that is a common language amongst your partners. But for today, I'm inviting you to just accept this as the language of RBA for now and the language of the webinar series, that an indicator helps to measure the achievement of a result at a population level. Some of you are working on obesity rates in your communities. And so an obesity rate would be a way of quantifying if all North Carolinians are indeed healthy. Is the obesity rate the only way you can quantify it? Of course not, but it is an example. Another way that you'll be looking at measurement is at the performance measure level, which is for programs and agencies or service systems. And as we move forward, we'll talk more about this way of having a shared measurement system within collective impact. But for today, again, we're focusing on population accountability with results or outcomes and indicators. So let's talk a little bit about a result statement. RBA begins with a results statement, and you want to make sure that you have a population that you are focusing in on, and that you know, in other words, the people that you're focusing in on, What geographic region is your area of focus? And then what is the state of well-being that you want for the individuals to have? An example of that is the results statement that I shared with you for Baltimore. All Baltimore City children enter kindergarten ready to learn. Some of you have similar statements for your communities. But I'm very curious, as for those of you who are part of a collective impact initiative, I'm wondering if you have practiced results-based accountability in your communities along with collective impact. How many of you have actually begun to start with that kind of result statement? In Baltimore, there was some infrastructure designed with our leadership program, not only under the umbrella of all Baltimore City children enter school ready to learn, but we also looked at some subgroups. Many of you may have working groups that are a part of your community partnerships. And Baltimore's School Readiness Initiative had the same thing. But underneath the overarching result, there were other results that each working group was focused in on. So even amongst this common agenda of all children entering kindergarten ready to learn, there were groups that were working towards specific results of target populations. For example, the second one that you see here says parents of young children will succeed in their role as their child's first teacher. And you can also see that the last result at the bottom says all Baltimore citizens will understand the value of quality early care and education as the means to achieve school readiness. So each of the working groups was very targeted with having strategies in each of these areas. And this really helped to support a comprehensive community action plan towards achieving school readiness. Shortly after Baltimore had an action plan for achieving school readiness, another movement began to occur in Baltimore City around babies being born healthy. And several communities were funded to actually improve the early lives of young babies and the health of babies in general. And this initiative was about babies born healthy. And the result was all babies are born full term and a healthy weight. And at this time, several communities began to focus in on their neighborhood around a very challenging, stubborn indicator of infant mortality. And Baltimore, because of this focus of comprehensive strategies at a community and neighborhood level, Baltimore has actually begun to see dramatic changes in infant mortality in a positive way. So a common agenda and using results and indicators together is very important. And we'll talk more over the course of the webinar series about some more details of each of these areas. I'm very curious before we go forward, Eileen, is it possible that we can do a little bit of our second poll looking at results around, and I have a question for you. If you're part of a collective impact initiative, has your initiative developed a clear results statement that is part of your common agenda? Do you, in your work in community, actually have the opportunity to think about results in this way? And when I say think about results, it's more than just saying, yes, we're pretty much working for school readiness. Or do you actually have a results statement that includes a region and a condition of well-being? About half of you have voted. We're going to give the rest of you the chance to vote. We'll take a few more seconds, about 20 more seconds. Have you been able to have a clear result statement within your communities? I'm going to add a little part to that just to make this even more interactive. You have a chat bar on the right-hand side of your screen. can you share with us what some of those result statements are? We're going to close the poll in just a few seconds, but for those of you who have already included your information in the poll, in the chat area, please share with us what some of your result statements are. Okay, we'll go ahead and close the poll now. And it looks like about 2/3 of you, about 66% of you actually have a result statement. And about 34% say that you do not have a result statement. So that just gives a little bit of information for you as a group. So what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about what my experiences are. And Eileen, at any point, if you want to share what some of the result statements are, that would be fine if we have any coming in.
Okay.
So I wanted to share with you some of the work that I've done in communities. Across the country, one of the groups that I consistently work with is the United Way. And in actually the United Way of North Central Florida, I did some facilitation of their community visioning process a few years ago. And this is where they brought together several partners to look at community impact. For those of you who have joined us from United Ways, some of you may be using the United Way Community Impact Frame, and it aligns very well with results-based accountability. And Ted Granger, was the president of United Way of Florida and made this comment about RBA, is that the process is strategic, and he found it to be very efficient, ongoing, and easy to understand. And it really does help to ensure that people the outcomes are achieved. So this is the quote that he gave. And my experience with United Ways, I've experienced both those who are using community impact efforts and others who are not. And the United Way of North Central Florida, we actually have a blog post on our website that goes into a case study of this work for those of you who are interested. But they had a community visioning process where they brought partners together from across Alachua County and other nearby counties, and they actually began to ask their partners to look at specific results and indicators and to weigh in using the RBA process on strategies that would improve the lives and the well-being of people in those counties. RBA continued to be implemented by the United Way group, the United Way of North Central Florida, at an organizational level. And I'll talk about some of the challenges that existed in continuing to create this common agenda in a comprehensive way across the county rather than implementing it at an organizational level only.
Okay, we have a few results statements. Would you like me to read some of them?
Please, yeah, thank you.
Okay. The first one is Vermont's healthy, vibrant, creative sector embeds creativity into the state's DNA by advancing positive quality of life and economic outcomes at the state level and among Vermont regions and communities.
Okay, thank you. That's from Vermont. Thank you for that. And maybe one or two more?
Yeah, hold on a second. Okay. Oh, darn.
That's okay.
Sorry,
we'll go forward.
Sorry.
That's okay. We'll come back. We'll come back if necessary. So there is another group that many of you on the webinar may be connected to, which is the Promised Neighborhoods. Policy Link has implemented RBA as a part of their Promised Neighborhoods Institute and is also using results-based accountability results scorecard as a way of using transparent, collaborative, and data-driven decision-making. So each of the Promised Neighborhoods is actually has actually included results and indicators and a common agenda in their implementation of their Promised Neighborhoods work. So I wanted to think about, for those of you who, Eileen just gave an example, the example that you just heard, you may have heard in that example who the population is, but you want to be clear to have a specific population in your results statement. You also want to have a geographic scope, whether it be a neighborhood or a school district catchment area, make sure that you have that included. And you also want to know what is the condition of well-being that you're looking for from that community. It should be pretty short and concise so that everyone that hears it is connected to it and can understand it. Short and simple and concise is great. And so these are some examples that I created. I made these up for the most part. This first one, all New York children enter kindergarten ready to succeed. I have worked with New York's Administration for Children and Families, and I know they have a great effort going on at that level. The one I mentioned to you is a real result. Baltimore babies are born healthy. I'm actually working with a group in Coachella Valley, California, and I just yesterday heard a result that they're using. All Coachella Valley students are prepared for college, career, and life. Some of you may have a result statement similar to that, but I do encourage you that if you are generally working in an area with a group of people and your result is not something that everyone can state easily, that you consider modifying it to make it simple and clear so that everyone in your group can state it. It's almost like brand management. I'm working with some fantastic communities in South Florida with the Health Foundation of South Florida. Hopefully some of them are on the call today. And their result is the Miami Gardens community is healthy and active. There's also the Little Havana community that's working with the Live Healthy Community Partnership. Some in Sarasota, Florida, all older adults in Sarasota are living with dignity. That's one that I created based upon some work that I've completed in various communities. So I'm very curious about the result statements that you're using. But you might be asking, what should I do if we do not have a clear result statement that is known and used by our group? Well, the first thing you should do is take a moment, 10 minutes at the beginning of your next meeting, and ask the group to write down, what is our result? And see how many different results come about in the room. A lot of times people think that they're working together with a common result statement, and it really is not the case. So in our next webinar, I'm going to ask, did you go back to your group? What did they say? And what was this statement that you developed based upon your knowledge? But for some of you, you might go back to your group and they're like, yeah, we know what it is. So I'm just very curious that we can be interactive and learn from each other around what's happening in communities.
Okay, I have a few more.
Okay, just a couple more will be great.
Yeah, just one or two more. In Hayward Promise Neighborhoods, students successfully transition from middle school grades to high school. And in the same area, students feel safe at school and in their community. In Ottawa, everyone has a home. And in Dorset, residents are safe, healthy, independent, and prosperous.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that sharing, each one of you that shared your result statements. It's very helpful. As you can see, the ones that you heard, it's very easy to understand some of those that were shared, right? And so this is engaging around different partners, looking at populations, the geographic scopes, the condition of well-being, to develop your own community's result statement. Very, very helpful. Thank you for sharing that. So as we move forward now to thinking about the turn the curve, you have your result, and we're going back now to RBA's turn the curve. So then the next thing you want to think about is how do we measure the success of achieving that result? We'll talk in the next webinar about a shared measurement system in more detail, but in your final common agenda or in your final community action plan, you should have clear indicators that show the achievement of the result. And let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. So with RBA, you have all of your partners that come together, you have a result, all North Carolinians are healthy, you have indicators, and then you have community-wide strategies and partners that are working together with mutually reinforcing activities, to use one of the conditions, but working together to improve that indicator. Now, one agency alone cannot improve the indicator. Even the health department cannot improve the obesity rate by itself. It takes several partners working together. And some of the partners, they're implementing programs that you have data on. You know that they're effective, they're efficient. Others, you may not have data. And some places, you're implementing things that you're thinking, you know what, this really does not contribute to our North Carolinians are healthy. Should we continue that or not? RBA gives you a way of working together, having data-driven, transparent conversations to choose strategies for the community that will improve the data. How will you know if they improve the data? You will have performance measures for those strategies with clear outcomes so that there is performance accountability for all of your partners. So when you're developing a common agenda, as a community, the first thing you want to ask yourselves is, are we doing the right things? Do we have the right strategies in our comprehensive community action plan? And then the second thing you'll ask, or simultaneously, the things that we're doing, can we get that green check mark? Are we doing them right with client outcomes? So over the years, this is what I've been doing with communities. I began to share, communicate, and support the replication of this work outside of Baltimore and outside of Maryland. And in 2011, Kenya and Kramer proposed collective impact. I immediately began to see how results-based accountability can be used as a tool to meet the conditions of collective impact. And as many of you who have heard of collective impact already know, it is has influenced the work in communities in many ways. These conditions resonated with people. And so I wrote this white paper so that folks could easily see a way to connect these two, achieving collective impact with results-based accountability. You can certainly access this on our website, and it's freely open. We're very open and generous with the materials. Mark Friedman, who developed this framework and wrote the book Trying Hard is Not Good Enough, is a model of openness, availability, and accessibility. And that's the very reason why we're offering this free webinar series, because we want this information about how to achieve collective impact using results-based accountability to be readily accessible in communities. So let's think about now, as looking at how to achieve this collective impact in using results-based accountability. We're going to look today, these are the 5 conditions of collective impact. We'll go over each one of them over the next few weeks, but today we're going to look at the common agenda. So how do you develop a common agenda for shared accountability? How do you make that happen so that the data is actually being improved at the community level? What is a common agenda? Many of you said that you were not familiar with collective impact. So let's start with that first condition. According to the Collective Impact Forum, the common agenda is coming together to collectively define a common agenda coming together to collectively define a problem and create a shared vision to solve it. Right? So coming together collectively. I've shared with you how some of the communities I've worked with were doing that, and now having a language around it, a common agenda, is what we're going to talk about. How do you meet that condition using RBA? Well, within RBA, you can actually look at a common agenda in 2 ways, right? It's not just one thing. First of all, you want to affirm an explicit result statement to express the desired condition of well-being for your community partnerships work together. Notice that this language says community partnership. In my experiences, I have worked with different organizations that say we're doing collective impact in our agency. Collective impact, in order to be working with collective impact, it is something you're working with external partners in a community partnership for population accountability to improve indicators at a community level. So first and foremost, go back to your collaboratives or coalitions and ask them, what is our result statement, or what should it be? Let's create one together. The other application is that there is a co-development of a comprehensive action plan with community-wide strategies and partners to implement the plan. So basically, you are working with your partners in the community, and you are agreeing on a result, and you're saying we're going to work together to have strategies that we all agree will achieve this result. Within RBA, the action plan must include indicators, it must include a story behind the data, and it must include a way that the strategies are connected to that story behind the data. Oftentimes in communities, when funding is made available, the first thing that folks do is sit down at the table together and say, what are we going to do? What are we going to put in the proposal? RBA says you start with the result that you want, and then you go through the turn the curve process to get to the strategies. So you begin with the end in mind, right? You start with the end, as Stephen Covey would say, the author that many of you may have also read. You begin with the end in mind, or you begin with the end and then you work backwards to the means by which you will achieve that result. This common agenda clearly states those two principles that I talked about earlier in the webinar, the two key principles of RBA. You begin with the end and you work backwards to the means, and then transparent data-driven decision-making. That's the common agenda in the context of RBA. I've worked with several organizations that have applied these concepts. One of them is the Children's Trust in Miami, Florida. Many of you on the call are familiar with the Children's Trust. They have, at the time when I was working with them in the development of this results-based strategic plan, they had a 33-member board, and they have property tax dollars that go directly toward their voters have decided that they want to use part of their property tax dollars towards children and families. And so they created a results-based strategic plan for investments using the results-based accountability framework in their board and in community listening forums to develop a final plan for 2001 to 2015. The Children's Trust, although they have a new plan at this time, this plan was a great example of bringing community partners together to co-create a plan. So if we think back to this, what is a common agenda? If you look back at that, then you'll notice that they did come together to collectively define the problem, and they created a shared vision for solving it. There are explicit result statements in that strategic plan. The challenge lies that the plan was simply for the Children's Trust. So the Children's Trust had strategies that they were responsible for implementing in Miami-Dade. Beginning with this strategic plan, they actually adapted their vision statement to say that we will work with community partners on behalf to improve the lives of children. So this is one of the areas that is often a challenge, is bringing all the partners together to have one comprehensive plan that includes across organizations. Another group that I've worked with is the San Francisco Department of Public Health, the Population Health Division, where Dr. Tomas Aragon leads the Population Health Division. They have a strategic plan that they brought partners together in community, and they have a result. San Franciscans have optimal health and wellness at every stage of life. They have focus areas, they have headline indicators in their plan, and they also tell the story behind the data for each of these headline indicators. You'll notice that this is very similar to what happened in Baltimore, where Baltimore had the work groups. San Francisco has these focus areas and then headline indicators under each focus area. The difference is that this is for population level change across several target populations, vulnerable populations that they're working with. And so this is just an example of how RBA has been implemented in communities. So all of these groups moving toward measurable collective impact and having common agendas. Baltimore, you had an example where you had several community partners and there was a comprehensive action plan which met those conditions for a common agenda. San Francisco's plan, when you get to the strategy level, the strategies are predominantly around the strategies that need to happen in order to improve the health of those populations, predominantly implemented by the health department. And then I wanted to mention there is a great example of what does it look like to follow up a plan. And this is thanks to Marquez Frazier, one of the team members at RLG, added this recent addition around fetal and infant mortality in Baltimore, a report that shows what has happened in Baltimore over time to really improve decrease the infant mortality rate. So it's important not only to begin with a plan like what happened in Baltimore, but to also follow up with these plans and continuously update it, because it's about continuous improvement of the indicators at the population level, continually coming back and reporting back amongst your partners and with others how you're doing at achieving the result. So I'm very curious in finding out, we're going to do another poll. If you are part of a collective impact initiative, has your initiative developed a comprehensive community action plan that identifies the unique roles of community partners in implementing the plan? Again, if you are part of a collective impact initiative, has your initiative developed a comprehensive community action plan that identifies the unique roles of community partners in implementing the plan? We'll give you some time to respond to that poll. You'll notice I emphasize the word comprehensive because sometimes you have an action plan that is basically your organization is moving forward that plan even though you had input from the community. Sometimes health departments are set up to create a health improvement plan, and oftentimes the health department gets partners together to create that plan. Really curious to know, to what extent do we have comprehensive community action plans in our communities? About half of you have voted. We're going to give you guys a few more moments to vote on this. If you could take a moment to put your vote in, that way we'll know a little bit more from all of you guys who are out there listening but haven't clicked that button yet. Okay, remember this question was only to those who were part of a collective impact initiative, so about half of the group has voted, which is fine because at the beginning of the session it was clear, we're going to go ahead and close the poll, it was clear at the beginning of the session that not everyone is part of a collective impact initiative, but of those of you who are, 32% of you said yes, we have a comprehensive community action plan that identifies the unique roles of community partners, and then about almost 70% said no. So this really does inform the work in communities, and it aligns with my own personal experience that oftentimes we think we have a comprehensive plan, but we don't quite get there. So in small writing, I love challenges, but I don't want the challenges to overwhelm the great work that's going on in communities. So some of the challenges that I've noticed is that one organization might set the results and they become perceived as the owner of that result. Really, a result statement is about many partners across communities. So that's one challenge. Another challenge is oftentimes the community story is developed by one organization, and so the plan is about the community, but only from one group of people that has written that story. The story needs to be inclusive of many voices, and we'll talk more about that in future webinars. And then, especially around that issue, how has the community resident voice been included in authentic ways in developing the common agenda? You probably have some other challenges that you've experienced in community, because 68% of you said no, and I'm very curious about what those challenges are, and am looking forward to hearing back from you guys about that as we continue the webinar series. Today, we have focused on one part of results-based accountability. RBA can actually be used to align management, budgeting, and strategic planning. So today we looked at strategic planning on a population level, looking at results and indicators, and having a comprehensive action agenda among all stakeholders and partners, which is called with collective impact a common agenda. As we move forward, we'll look at how do organizations create their own type of plan and become a results-based organization. But for today, we did a common agenda and focused in on how can you move forward to have a community comprehensive plan. So I highly recommend that you get the book, Trying Hard is Not Good Enough. You'll find a way to get that on our website, but that you also continue to be a part of this webinar series, because we're going to be talking about how do you go from having a community result with indicators, stories behind the baseline, and strategies, so that as strategies are implemented, if you are part of a program, you will have performance measures to show how successful that program is or what you're working on. You'll have the story behind the baseline for that program, and you as a program will even have an action plan for improving how the people who come into that program are actually better off. RBA can actually also be used for advocacy efforts as well as other types of efforts. But whatever you're implementing in community, you should have an action plan with a budget that is based upon what you know about your story, so that you can actually improve the data for that program as well. In a future webinar, we'll talk about mutually reinforcing activities, so that if you're part of a local organization, a federal agency, a business, a civic, nonprofit, faith-based organizations, whoever you are in community, all of the strategies are aligned around improving the result for that community. So we'll talk more and more about that as we go forward, looking at achieving collective impact with results-based accountability. I have to acknowledge the work of these key critical players who are driving community change, Mark Friedman, John Kania, and Mark Kramer, in supporting the development of this work. We have a conference coming up in June with RLG in Baltimore, and we'd like to invite you to join us for that. But for now, I'm going to invite you into, as an interactive member of this webinar series, into a community of practice on RBA and collective impact. I am developing a community of practice, and if you're interested in what a community of practice is, or if you've never been a part of a community of practice, a community of practice is formed by groups like us who are interested in collective learning around a specific area. So my area of learning, I'm interested in the alignment of RBA and collective impact. I have a passion for community engagement and engaging stakeholders in the work of that. And so if you share that type of passion, I'd like to invite you to be a part of the community of practice for RBA and collective impact. And as we move forward in developing this community of practice, I'm asking for any examples that from anyone on this webinar series. If you have a success or a challenge that you have encountered while trying to do this work of community development and achieving well-being for communities, if you have a success or a challenge that you've used RBA or you've tried to implement the conditions of collective impact with success or not, please take some time to email Marquez Frazier at the email that you see listed here. He's one of the team members that is a part of Results Leadership Group, and we are collecting information. I may ask you to share it at an upcoming webinar, or as a community of practice, this webinar series will be the first introduction into working together and engaging together around this area of RBA and collective impact. So please take some time to send just a brief note about if you'd like to connect specifically around this area. Our next webinar is on Thursday, March the 10th from 1 to 2:30, and we'll be looking at RBA implementation of a shared measurement system. So please take time to join us. We do leave time for questions at the end of the webinar, so I would like to take a moment. I will first of all let you know that you will have we're not closing out the webinar, but we are leaving a question, and we're about to move into a question and answer period. Each of you will receive a survey request at the end of this webinar today, and we're asking for you to fill out that survey, and we'll ask you, would you like to be a part of this community of practice as a part of the survey? And for everyone that fills out the survey, we will send the slide deck so that you'll have this information from these PowerPoint slides if you would like to have them. So I'm going to stop here and see if anyone has any questions based upon what has been presented today. And you can put questions in the chat bar at the right-hand side. And Eileen will share the questions.
Yes, we have several that have come in already during your presentation, so I'll just get started with the ones that we already have.
Sure.
One question is, what about community coalitions? Is it appropriate for them to hold more responsibility for the plan?
That is a great question. I'll give a concrete example, and I will likely use this example in future webinars and go into more detail. But I have worked with, for example, the Florida Oral Health Coalition, and the coalition partners came together and created a plan for oral health in Florida. Now, coalition members are usually individuals that have expertise in a specific area, and they've been invited to that table, into that coalition, because of their specific area of expertise, or because of their role at an agency, or because of their interest, or maybe their education. So a coalition is a perfect opportunity to build an action plan in a certain area. As the action plan is developed, in order for it to be a comprehensive community action plan or a comprehensive plan, it's very important to get the voice of several stakeholders in the development of that plan, especially those individuals that would be impacted by the decisions made around strategies. So I would ask those members of coalitions, who is sitting at the table of your coalition, and how is the voice of all community partners being represented in authentic ways? One of the ways that you can move towards getting feedback outside of the coalition is to prepare the plan and then take it into community and get, through focus groups or through community listening forums, some feedback on the plan. That is one method that is frequently used. I am an advocate of engaging that voice earlier in the process. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay. What is the proprietary content of RBA and collective impact? Who owns it? How can communities utilize these tools with local facilitators? Or do these initiatives need to be facilitated by organizations that hold the proprietary information?
Great question. That is a fantastic question. Mark Friedman developed results-based accountability. There are some proprietary licensing that you will notice. It is trademarked, and there is some licensing connected to it. For most of the people on this webinar series. If you're from a public, private, or nonprofit organization, I'm going to answer it a little differently. If you're from a nonprofit organization or a government organization, you can, and you're using it for the well-being of community, you can certainly use it. It's accessible. We have information that this webinar is free. We have information on our website. Mark Friedman has websites that he uses. It's open and accessible. There are some limited licensing provisions that you would have to, I don't know them by heart. You would have to go online and look at them in terms of RBA, but that's mostly if you're a for-profit firm and you're looking to do this work at that level. So you can send us an email and I can give you more specific information about that. The second part of that question was local facilitators. Can you repeat that part of the question, please, Eileen?
How can communities utilize these tools with local facilitators, or do these initiatives need to be facilitated by organizations that hold the proprietary information?
Oh, thank you for that question, whoever asked that. No, we do not have any ownership of RBA facilitation, right? Facilitation in communities. I'm trained as a results-based facilitator, and I will share that one of my early training came through Jolie Bain Pillsbury and Sherbrooke Consulting. She's a phenomenal master facilitator. There is a small cadre of facilitators that have those similar skill sets as results-based facilitators that bring together RBA and some of the concepts of results-based facilitation. Mark Friedman actually also worked with Jolie Bain Pillsbury early on in the development of RBA. So there's an RBA family around that work, but in terms of needing to have any proprietary work around facilitating RBA, the answer to that is no. You can, at this time, you can use our resources and use what you learn on this webinar, and you can come to a training if we have a training on, I do trainings for facilitation because it is a skill set. I just did a training on yesterday in Coachella Valley in California for a group of people that's about to facilitate some some listening forums in the community using RBA. So there is a skill set to facilitating these conversations, and that can be helpful, but it's not required.
Okay, next question is, what should be developed?
I'm sorry. When you asked about proprietary information with collective impact, I am not aware of any proprietary information. I think the folks that do collective impact are pretty open, and with the use of the 5 conditions. If anyone on the webinar knows otherwise, you can feel free to share that too. Okay, thank you. Another question?
Okay. What should be developed first? Does the performance level feed the population level, or should the population be developed first and then inform the performance level?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So if you're working, because we're talking about a common agenda today, I would highly recommend that you start with the population result that you're working to achieve, and then using the turn the curve process, create strategies that will help the community to achieve that result. So that as we move forward in the webinar series, we'll talk more about mutually reinforcing activities, and even next week when we talk about the shared measurement, we're going to talk about distinguishing the measurement of programs from the measurement of population level change. But if you're working with a common agenda for community impact, you start at population level.
Okay. This is a question back to the beginning of your presentation on school readiness. What tool was used to measure readiness? In New Hampshire, we do not have a standardized tool for the state, and we struggle with this.
Okay, thank you. I work with a lot of early childhood efforts, not only in Maryland, but in other states as well, in Colorado and California, and some other places. And I know that this is an ongoing challenge. in Maryland, when I was working with school readiness, we used an assessment called the work sampling system. It looked at several domains of learning ranging from early literacy, social emotional development, scientific thinking, mathematical thinking. It was based upon Pearson's tools, the work sampling system. And so that was the measure, and it was a composite score looking at the percent of children entering kindergarten at the classroom level and at the individual classroom, school, and then district and state level. So it was a pretty common measurement throughout, assessment tool throughout the state. At this time, Maryland has moved away from that structure, and so they're using a different something with using the Common Core assessments, and so I will hopefully during this webinar series be able to give you guys more information on that. I understand the challenge. If anyone on this webinar has some information that you'd like to contribute to next week's webinar, this is a dynamic series, so you can certainly contribute information on school readiness assessments, and I will include that in next week's presentation of shared measurement system.
Great. By comprehensive community action plan, how do you know if only one agency is making the decisions? Should the community partners be on the steering committee? And how do you reach them if they are not?
Within RBA, we have a criteria for selecting strategies that move from what works to what do we propose to do. So the criteria, and we'll talk more about this as we go forward, the criteria are, is the strategy specific enough to be implemented? Does it have the leverage to actually improve the data at a community level? Does it fit with community and organizational values? And does it have the reach that you want it to have? Is it feasible? Is it affordable? Can you take it to scale, right? So there's a very clear criteria that is used to select strategies. Now, the first part of that question was how are decisions made? That can differ in every community, but the communities, when I'm implementing RBA in communities, all of the partners weigh in data-driven, transparent decision-making. So we actually walk through each of the strategies with the community, the folks at the table, and they weigh in on how they feel that each of those strategies meets those criteria. And not only does that happen at the steering committee table, I think you said, but it also, the strategies would be brought to community through listening forums or focus groups or community town halls, but some way everyone at each level gets to weigh in about those strategies. The Health Policy Institute of Ohio has a fantastic tool, and I'll try to include that as a reference in a future session, that engages community in authentic ways to determine, is this really a strategy that should be implemented in our community, because not every evidence-based practice is suitable for every community. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, please explain why collective impact cannot be implemented with internal partners when there are multiple departments working towards a common goal.
Great question. Great question. So I believe that collective impact in and of itself is about mutually reinforcing activities. RBA firmly supports the belief and the understanding that one agency or organization alone cannot improve a population level indicator. Because my experience is exactly that, my experience, you may live in a community that is small enough that one organization could drive population level change. I think that would be rare, and it is not, I am not saying exclusively that it could never happen, but in my experience, most population level indicators require more than one organization to drive change of that indicator.
Okay, that's all the questions that we have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So thank you everyone for your input and for your fantastic questions. I appreciate the work that you're doing in community. We will have, again, our upcoming conference, Measurable Impact, in Baltimore, and we hope that you'll be able to join our community practice at that location, as well as the webinar series over the next few weeks. Again, our next webinar is on Thursday, March the 10th from 1 o'clock to 2:30, and it will be on RBA and implementation of a shared measurement system, which is another condition of collective impact. We look forward to seeing you then, and I think that you can all make benefit of the 15 minutes that have been added to your day. Have a great day. Bye-bye.